Will Florida State get it done with 2026 quarterback recruiting?
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst and writer. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. Today's show is going to feature quarterback recruiting as the main theme. We're going to talk a little bit about how recruiting's improved, especially with how the 2025 class ended. Kevin Wynn is a key there. And then we're going to get into some unfortunate news off the field with a player being arrested. But first, quarterback recruiting. The Noles have a really good football player in the fold in Kevin Sperry in terms of his all-around ability from the class of 25. And you just want to keep building on that from there. There are different kinds of players you can bring in, but to be honest, Gus Malzahn's offense in particular needs a mobile signal caller. And to that point, if you look at the history of Mike Norvell, all but 1 year in 2019 when he had a player by the name of White at Memphis, they've all been really good as mobile quarterback. White was a guy that really didn't run much at all. But the rest of them, for the most part, they could really pick up the feed and make guys miss, run RPO, and just be a pain for defensive backs and linebackers to tackle, let alone defensive linemen. To that point, Florida State has targeted elite, not good, elite quarterbacks in the 26 class. I really thought they were headed in the right direction with Landon Duckworth, a player I've talked about numerous times here on Locked On Seminoles. But right now, I'm a little bit concerned. Why? The Ole Miss Rebels have a head coach by the name of Lane Kiffin who stopped by his high school last week. Things seem to be trending very heavily in that direction. Now, that's not to say that Florida State couldn't change that. But right now, from multiple sources that I've spoken with and also read about, Ole Miss seems to be the one that's taking the reins. If that's false, then multiple sources are wrong. That happens, but I'm going to go with what I've been told. So we'll see. But this is a kid that you cannot lose if you really want to be realistic about this. Not just a good player, a really good player, a really good fit. If they don't get him, Keisean Henderson would be the best fit, and he might be the best player in the country, but he's from outside Houston. That's further away. He is technically committed to the Houston Cougars, and I think he's pretty loyal to them from just being around Keisean a little over a month ago. So where does Florida State quarterback recruiting go if Duckworth is not in the fold on National Signing Day? I want to first look at that, then come back to Duckworth and how these things kind of change around. First off, Florida State knows this is not a one-trick pony kind of deal. I already mentioned Keisean in addition to Duckworth, but they've also put their name in the ring with other quarterbacks, guys that I've seen, honestly, for the most part. Diabell, kid that's committed to Texas. He's from American Heritage in South Florida. Really good player, but I question the fit there because while he could run some, he's better from the pocket, prefers the pocket. I'm not sure why him or Jaden O'Neal, a guy that I think's probably even more of a pocket guy. He's from California. Really, I like him a lot. He's a really good player. He's committed to Oklahoma, but I think he's more of a pocket guy as well. I'm not sure why Florida State's going after them, but whatever the case may be. Bo Bentley, a guy that absolutely would fit Florida State. He's from just outside of Dallas. I don't think they would have any problem with him. Like he just went nuts last year. First year he started, and he had over 50 touchdowns and had helped his team win a state title. But again, that's a Texas kid. That's really rough. Even if you get him committed where he's from, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, LSU, Oklahoma State, K-State, Baylor, there's all kinds of possibilities with what goes on between now and signing day. That's tough. That's why I keep coming back to Duckworth. But to that point, there is an ironic twist to this. An out-of-state player from a state that Florida State recruits fairly well, North Carolina, they've always seemed to get a guy out of that state at least every other year that was an impact player in some way, shape, or form as a recruit. A player by the name of Zayd Watt is committed to North Carolina. That's a really athletic kid. He's got some upside. He's not necessarily polished, but he's committed to the Tar Heels. Florida State's made an overture with him as well. And I'm sure there are some other quarterbacks too. I know this is not a full list. Now, back to Duckworth and why I think this is important from more than just a recruiting perspective to get a really good quarterback. You need to recruit the I-10 corridor. That's something you hear me say on this show constantly. He lives in Mobile, right off of I-10. He is also a kid that has maybe, 4 hours to get to Florida State with bad traffic, maybe a little under that. It's perfect from that perspective. He plays at a state championship level team in Jackson High School in Mobile, loaded with talent. Xavier Crowell, his teammate, the running back, one of the best running backs in the United States, even though he reclassed, could be a guy Florida State gets. That's a guy they're trying to get for an official visit as well. If you don't get Crowell or you don't get Duckworth, I would get it, but not getting either one would be bad. Prefer to get the quarterback, if anything else, just based on position. I think it's Crowell. I also think that establishing a foothold there, Gus has a lot of contacts in Mobile and South Alabama for recruiting at Auburn and continuing that pipeline at UCF. Florida State needs to hit. If you get Duckworth, it changes the perspective of kids in the greater Pensacola to the edge of Mississippi right there on that I-10 corridor. There's a lot of players there. You need to hit. There are other kids in Pensacola, Trenton Henderson. I'm not going to go down the list, but there's a ton from that corridor, just that hour or so, that Florida State would do very well to get. Getting the Pied Piper at quarterback is not just important for your recruiting class because you need a great signal caller. They absolutely do. But it sets a precedent. Hey, not only can we get a great player out of Alabama on the I-10 corridor, this is the top quarterback in the area, a guy that's an Elite 11 candidate, a national recruit, one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Why don't you come join him? That's one of the reasons I've talked about him so many times. I know how important this is, and the kids in South Alabama, who I know a lot of them from going down there and scouting, they know who he is. A lot of them know him on a personal level. He will impact not only the 26 class, but the 27, 28, 29, 30. These kids look up to him. He is a tremendous athlete. I just watched a couple of videos of Landon Duckworth, not playing football, playing basketball and dunking on people. He is a tremendous football player. He'd be good at soccer. He'd be good at wrestling. He'd be good at baseball. He'd be good at track. It wouldn't matter what sport it is. Landon Duckworth has the physical traits and the dominant mentality to be good at anything he would do. That kind of personality on your campus would be huge as well. Just saying. So again, while it's possible that they could get one of Bo Bentley, Jaden O'Neal, Zaid Watt, Keisean Henderson, BFL, all of those are possibilities. From a strategic standpoint, I don't think it's that close. I think Landon Duckworth gives you the most credibility as a football program if you are specifically Florida State. Proximity, man. Location, location, location. People talk about that all the time in real estate. Well, recruiting is about real estate. Florida State needs to claim their turf along I-10 in Florida, and if you extend it to Mobile, it's not going to hurt. Everybody knows who this kid is. He's really good. I've seen him play live. I've met him. He's a great guy. I don't think there's any doubt he would be very, very good. But if Ole Miss gets him, and I understand a quarterback wanting to play in Kiffin's scheme, he does a really good job with quarterbacks. There's no debating it, whether you like the guy or dislike the guy. He can coach quarterbacks. If they get him and Florida State ends up striking out at elite quarterbacks, it's great they got Sperry, but you need to back-to-back classes with quarterback. They got to get to the point where they're recruiting elite quarterbacks every year that fit the system to get out of this weird cycle they've been at quarterback recruiting for a long time. This is the year they can kind of take that step forward. I like Sperry, but again, you want to double your odds. So when we come back, we're going to talk about some key recruits they got coming in, a key recruit they just signed, and some of the things that I think he can help Florida State with. That is next here on Locked On Seminoles. Attention, Locked On Seminoles fans. The future of college sports is here, and it's transparent. Before the Roy App NIL negotiations happened a lot of times under the table. Fans didn't always know what was going on, and it was difficult to really understand and support the athletes that you loved. Now, Roy, you can get in on the action and support Florida State athletes in the most transparent way possible. Roy, the NIL app, allows you to do the following. Choose the player you want to support. Decide how much you want to contribute. and receive exclusive content from the athletes each week. The best part about it, if your player transfers, you get your money back. That's also really cool. It's a risk-free way to show your support. The Roy app gives fans control, no more worrying about what's going on behind the scenes. The Roy app will take care of that for you. So download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing Florida State athletes the way they deserve with transparency, trust, and real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite Florida State players. Kevin Wynn was dominant at a recent All-Star game. So dominant during a practice, they took him out because he was wrecking everything in the middle, causing problems. The offense couldn't really run their plays. That's what I like to hear. I just talked about Landon Duckworth being the key for the 26 class, most likely, barring something unforeseen. If they get Keisean Henderson, great. But we're going to stick with Duckworth because he's local. I think Kevin Wynn will help change Florida State on the defensive side of the ball. And the best part, he's already at Florida State. He was recently interviewed, had a lot of positive things to say about Terrence Knighton. He's still happy that some of the staff is around that recruited him, and he's happy with the scenario in Tallahassee. From a small school in Georgia, he's like, hey, man, I'm here. Talking about the All-Star game, now moving on to Florida State. He wants the ball in practice, the way he works out, and everything else. That's important. He can come in and make an impact this spring, I think, and kind of move himself up the depth chart because there's not many guys built like Kevin Wynn. 6'2" and over 320 pounds and just a human wrecking ball. That's the kind of kid that Florida State needs, and that leads me to the following. If you look at the players that they're recruiting, and I'm just going to mention a couple, they've got to start getting more elite players. Kevin was arguably the best defensive tackle in the country for the class of 25. Florida State hit a home run. If he'd have played at a bigger school where more eyeballs were on him, he was at a 1A school in Georgia, like middle of nowhere. If he was at a bigger school, he might have been ranked number one. Elite prospect. His film was ridiculous, and everybody I spoke to had super things to say about it. With that being the case, they still got to continue to do that. I want to make a couple predictions and kind of overall thoughts about where Florida State recruiting is and where they need to be by the end of this recruiting cycle. Number one, no more just getting 2, 3, 4 guys out of the top 100. They got to get like Ford needs to be like a bottom end year out of the top 100. You're Florida State University. You've got a real coaching staff in terms of recruiting now, much better than what they had. It's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good. Some of the guys they brought from UCF, some of the guys they brought from Nebraska, etc., they have really good connections in South Florida. They have guys that understand how to recruit in the South because they've been down South for so long, and they have experienced coaches overall. This shouldn't be that hard. And again, location for Florida State here, it's about as good as it gets. You're within 8 hours of about every major metroplex that you can imagine in the South. It's easy for parents to get to see their kids, and that's a big part of it. And Florida State's a mainstream brand. You need to be able to sell that. So a couple of examples here. Cam Brooks, I've talked about him numerous times, the defensive lineman from Thomas County Central over in Thomasville, Georgia, just across the line, like 12 miles into Georgia. Florida State has a chance, a really good chance. It's a school he grew up watching, but he's also set an official visit with Ohio State, etc. 10 years ago, do you think that would have been the case? He'd have been committed to Florida State right now. Why? Because they were good. Florida State has to backtrack, and it's not the fault of the coaches that are coming in the door, don't get me wrong. Pot Roast and Coach White and all those guys, they're trying to clean up a mess. They flat out are. But you cannot lose a big-time defensive lineman in your backyard, especially going to Ohio State. That's a prime problem. Ohio State's taking way too many players from down south. Georgia, Alabama, Florida. They're getting too many kids. That's a problem. I'm not saying he's going to Ohio State, but them being on the list already, that's not a good sign. Miami and numerous other schools, Georgia, are going after him too, but they can't allow Ohio State to get kids right out of their backyard. Secondarily, he's an example of a kid that I think is a top 100 talent. Depends on who you look at, like where he's ranked, but especially because he plays a premium position. If you're going to get to the point where you're going to win big, the defensive line is a major factor for the Noles. I think Cam Brooks, you could argue, is the most important recruit. I talked about Duckworth at quarterback. If you want to say him, okay, because it's quarterback, but overall, this kid's just about a half hour away. And he's got offers from pretty much everybody. You cannot let him go anywhere but Florida State. If you miss on him, this trend of missing on local top D linemen continues. That's how you end up being a team that doesn't get over the hump and get back into the college football playoff discussion. Got to have them. Here's another one. And this one's a little bit different. It's not as close, but Florida State historically has been one of the schools in the conversation for DBU. I mean, for crying out loud, Deion Sanders played at Florida State. Doesn't get much more elite than that. Well, this kid's from the greater area where Deion's from. He's from a little further south at North Fort Myers, but I just don't see how you can not, with their staff, this shouldn't be that hard. One of the kids, at least, the elite DBs in state, they should get. And the guy I'm going to talk about is Chauncey Kennan. He's from Booker High School in Sarasota. It's about an hour and a half away from where Deion grew up. And he has the athleticism, the change of direction, the speed, to break on the ball, the instincts, to be a guy that plays early. With Evan Cooper now joining the staff, and Sertan still on the staff, that's a really good combination. But he's got official visits lined up to some major programs. This is kind of a challenge. If you have there's no layup with a top 100 kind of recruit, but if you're not going to get the in-state DB when you have those two coaches, that would worry me. Here are the other visits that I've seen, and this could have changed. Right now, May 30th, got Miami. Georgia's June 6th. Florida State, June 13th. LSU's June 20th. That is a murderer's row list for recruiting. Those coaches on those staffs know what they're doing. Either the DB coach, coordinator, head coach, or a combination are all really good at it. But again, in-state, Florida State's known for DBs. They've got really good defensive back coaches. They got a new staff that's proven. If you can't get a kid like that, how are you going to reach that goal of like minimum getting, this is just mine. I'm not saying that Norvell looks at it this way, but at least 4 guys in the country every year you get in the top 100. I don't think that's too difficult to ask. It's Florida State, for crying out loud. Kennan's a great example. I'm going to be monitoring his recruitment, barring something unforeseen. I expect Florida State to be in it for him all the way through National Signing Day. You have to be able to get elite DBs in your home state because that's the lowest bar. It's inside the state of Florida. You're a state school. It's DB. You're one of the best DB programs in the country, and you've got elite DB coaches with serious ties to the state of Florida and South Florida. This shouldn't be that hard. Florida State recruiting has a chance this year with these new coaches to have a top 10 class. Losing a kid like Chauncey Kennan would be a major setback. Now, you could still get somebody else. I'm not saying you couldn't, but this one seems pretty natural, especially because he already lined up a visit to Tallahassee. If you want to say somebody else, that's fine. And the kind of in between, like Javari Flowers, who just reclassed from 26 to 25, that's fine. But overall, Florida State's DB room, right now, it's the healthiest of any position on the roster. You get kids up for spring ball, to show them what you got. The coaches, this shouldn't be that hard. Florida State should get at least one top 100 DB every single year in recruiting with the guys they have on staff. And I'm using a Kennan as an example, but I think he's as prime an example as anybody on the entire recruiting board for somebody they should get. We'll see if I'm right or not. When we come back, we're going to talk about a player that's been in some trouble who's also a DB. I don't really like talking about kids getting in trouble that much, but there's really no way to avoid this. A lot of players have off the field issues. It's not a news flash because it happens a lot. Some kids get away with stuff, some kids don't. But Charles Lester was driving on a suspended license, et cetera, didn't pass a field sobriety test. I'm not going to go through the whole report. There's plenty of articles out there from some Florida State sites, and you can look it up yourself. But the freshman from last season has extremely high levels of talent to play corner or safety. It doesn't even matter where you play him. He can play receiver, whatever, elite talent. He just got in trouble. This is the 3 questions that I have about it. And you can expand on it all you want. Comment down below on YouTube, etc. Number 1, has this been a recurring problem? Have they had issues with him? I don't know if I'll ever find out any of this, but has Florida State had problems with him? Is this a one-off, etc.? Because no matter how talented a player is, if you're drinking and driving, as it's alleged, and I'm sure this will end up in court, but if it is true, you got to ask yourself what's going on. What do we need to do better on our end to prevent this? And B, what happened for it to happen in the first place that we didn't see coming? Again, is this a one-off? I have no idea. I mean, I know Charles a little bit from being around him in 7-on-7, but I don't know him personally. I have no idea what his habits are away from the gridiron. But if this happens consistently, you want to take care of the young man first in society. Football is secondary. I know we're all here for Florida State football, and that's great, but that just can't happen. Next, how does that impact this spring? Is it a situation where he was way out of line? Does Florida State know about it? How does it impact him from a spring practice standpoint? How does that impact the depth chart as a subsequent question? He was going to compete for a starting corner spot. What do I know is he's got the athleticism. He's over 6 foot. His change of direction and length and speed and jumping ability, every single thing you look for was present coming out of high school. And I actually knew about him when he was in 8th grade. Like, he was that good. And I never doubted for a second that he was going to be a kid that was going to be big time. Never doubted for a second. Very, very talented football player. Having stated that, there's still a limit. If he's having problems, you got to set a precedent with your program, especially after a 2-10 season. Discipline, adhering to societal standards first, team rules, all that. If Norvell and the staff make the wrong call on this, it could cost him in a lot of different ways. And I know a lot of people have opinions about guys getting in trouble off the field and all that. And again, I'm not passing judgment. I don't know how much of it's true. It's just he was arrested. That is fact. Whether it sticks, whether it goes into probation, zero clue. Again, I'm not going out to read the whole thing. Anybody can go get that. It's a pretty easy legal copy to get offline in about 10 seconds off whatever your favorite search engine is. But Charles Lester being in trouble is now is kind of a litmus test for Norvell and the staff, the athletic administration, on multiple fronts. But the one I want to talk about most is directly for this spring. How do you fix whatever happened with him? Take care of the young man, but you got to figure out the best way to do it and not mess up the locker room while still putting your foot down. They were not a disciplined football team in any way last year. I don't care what anybody says. I'll argue with them all day long, and I'll simply say scoreboard, 2-10. If anybody wants to argue with that, show me a 2-10 team that's disciplined. There's no such thing. This is the kind of thing you can't let snowball, especially right before spring ball. There's got to be a precedent. And I'm not trying to be hard on Charles, but it is very important that whatever decision they make is one that A, is fair, and B, the players in the locker room will accept. And sometimes that's rough. What I'm asking may not even be possible, but they can't have off the field issues taking away from what happens in spring ball. It's just reality, especially coming off 2-10. And let's be honest, Mike would not be here right now at Florida State if he hadn't signed a contract the way he did. They owed him over $50 million. They owed him 20, he'd have been canned. So it's a thin line now. I just speak the truth, and that's the way it is. So every little decision he makes is going to be scrutinized. Ironically, the administration's directly involved with this too, so they're connected. It makes it a little more complex, but how does it work academically? How does it work in terms of like a student conduct code and all those things? I have no idea, but you got to figure out your depth chart in the spring. If Lester's not playing, that's unfortunate. Again, he's super talented. Now, I want him to get every chance. I don't think a screw up like this should end your college football career by any means. That's completely ridiculous. But at the same time, there's got to be a punishment. If they can get it done where he's back on track and it doesn't mess up the locker room, that's ideal. But what is it? These are the kinds of decisions that guys do make millions of dollars for. It's hard. I don't say anything like this lightly, but I don't know if there is a great answer that I could come up with because every kid is different, but you want to have team rules that are basic. It's not realistic because every single player has a different background. So this is why being a head coach in college football causes guys to go gray or look like me, be a ball guy. It's hard, man. Kids are going to do stupid things. So we'll see. When we come back tomorrow, we're going to talk about some more football on the offensive side of the ball. We'll talk about quarterback, the depth chart, things they got to do, and then the offense overall. That'll be tomorrow's show for Locked On Seminoles. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast. And, of course, subscribe. I will see you again on Friday on Locked On Seminoles.